Now my eyes are watering.
Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Westerville City Schools Board of Education. The agenda will be displayed on the screens in the front of the room for you to follow along. There will be two opportunities this evening to address the board, the first being Agenda Item 6.1. The first set of public comments is relative to Agenda Items 7.1 through 11.2. Please state the agenda items you are referencing at the beginning of your comments. The second opportunity is Agenda Item 12.1. There is a sign-up sheet located on the table in the back of the room, and each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board. A timer will be shown on the screen. And with that, Ms. Marshall, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Bell?
Here.
Ms. Cotter? Dr. Nesterbaker?
Here.
Mr. Velardo?
Here.
Mrs. Davidson?
Here. Will you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, up first tonight, district highlights and recognitions, and I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Velardo.
Thank you, President Davidson. We are just really excited for tonight's special district highlight and recognition. We are going to honor those in our district who have been chosen National Merit Semi-Finalists. And I can just think of nothing else that we are just excited because this not only represents just stellar academics, but very strong character within our district, and all three of our high schools are represented. So in just a second, we're going to go and stand up here in front with Dr. Kellogg and Miss Marshall. But at this time, I'd like to invite to the podium Mr. Scott Reeves, the Secondary Academic Affairs Director. We'll go and get in place, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Velardo, and thank you, President Davidson, Dr. Kellogg, and members of the board, Treasurer Marshall. Each year, over 1.5 million juniors take the preliminary scholastic aptitude test, which we know as the PSAT. The National Merit Scholarship Corporation annually screens PSAT test results and provides the opportunity for seniors who become National Merit finalists to compete for over $31 million in scholarships this spring. The first step is to become a National Merit semifinalist. Out of over 1.5 million test takers in the PSAT, only around 16,000 nationally are named semifinalists. That's the top 1% in the country. I'm proud to present this evening the 7, and we have 6 that are present, but we have 7 Westerville City School students who were named National Merit semifinalists and are among that exclusive 1% in our nation. And so I will call them up individually, and they will get a certificate from you and a well-received congratulations and a well-deserved and a well-earned recognition. First, representing Westerville Central High School, Juliet Bernard. You clap again. That's it. Also from Westerville Central High School, Justin Wade. And not present with us tonight is Robert Boyd, who is also representing Westerville Central High School. Moving on to the Warriors of Westerville North, I'd like to present Mason Fight. Also from Westerville North, Lauren Haynes. Rounding out our students from Westerville North High School is Marin Callista. And representing Westerville South this evening is Mason Harris. Once again, these students will have the opportunity to continue in the competition to be National Merit Finalists, and as parents hope, are awarded some of that $31 million in scholarship money. Congratulations again, guys. Thank you.
Yeah. Really? Just so you know.
Okay. 4.1, approve the minutes of the regular meeting of the Board of Education held on Monday, September 9th, 2019. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any comments? Ms. Marshall?
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Abstain.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. And we have two reports this evening. We'll start with 5.1, State Report Card, and we'll pass it over to Dr. Kellogg.
Thank you, President Davidson, members of the board. I'm going to spend a few minutes tonight going through a couple of components of the recently released district report card. I'm not getting into individual school report cards. It's just our district report card. I'm doing this through the ODE website, the interactive website, so that if anybody wants to check into some more of the data, they can do that. But I'm going to touch on a couple pieces, and I'll give a couple comments about it at the end point. So there are 6 components to our grade card. There we go. achievement grade, progress grade, gap closing, graduation, improving at-risk K-3 readers, prepare for success. Some of these have more data elements underneath them than others. I'll kind of go through each piece. This year, our component grade or overall grade for achievement was a C. Last year it was a D, so we've moved up on this one a little bit. Just a couple data points. One of the places that I like to pay attention to is our performance index. We had 90.9 out of a possible 120 points. I like the PI because this is really how all of our students did in all the state tests. So it's the only way to move your PI up is more students passing the test at a higher rate. That makes sense, right? And so this is a measure that I do kind of pay attention to in terms of how we're doing. Our trend data over the last several years, from this year to this year was a change in state tests. Since that time period, we've kind of flatlined a little bit, and this is an area of focus for us as a school district, is just how we're performing on these state tests. The other part of the component grade we haven't performed as well. We did pick up another one of the indicators. This is the indicator piece, and it shows the percentage of our students passing each test at each grade level. The state benchmark is 80%. You can see in a lot of places we're just below the 80% mark and making some progress in that area. I don't like that measure as much for a couple different reasons. It doesn't really take into account all of our students, just takes into account a certain percentage of our students on those state tests. So our composite grade for achievement was a C. It was up a notch from last year, and something we'll continue focusing on without putting too much of a distraction on state tests. The progress grade or value added, we actually jumped from an F to a B last year. This is a metric that's getting a lot of attention by policymakers. The calculation of it is kind of a black box, and it's hard to decipher everything that happens in the calculation. But essentially it's designed to measure the growth of students over a year, and then it breaks it into smaller groups. Not surprisingly, where we tend to struggle is our students in lowest 20% in achievement and students with disabilities. These continue to be sore spots for us, not just here, but in other measures that we need to put some focus on, and that's what we'll be working on this next year. So that's the progress measure. As I said, we did climb up to a B this year on that particular measure. This is a squirrely little mouse here. Gap closing is an important one. This is how our subgroups are performing. We got a B here, which is a nice overall grade. But underneath that, as you can see, where it gets concerning is the red dots represent the state benchmark for performance. They do a performance index by subgroup. So the red dot represents the state's target for us for that subgroup, and then the colored band shows you how we did against that state benchmark for each of our subgroups. And so you still have the same problem as we see in the achievement side, is that some of our subgroup populations are not achieving at the same level as some of our other groups, even though they're meeting the state benchmark. The little red dot moves every year. The state benchmark for performance goes up every year. So we continue to have to make progress in that vein. And again, some of the subgroups where we struggle would be students with disabilities, English language learners, and economically disadvantaged. So these are areas we want to continue improving our performance on. And you can look at this. That's for English language arts. I apologize. This mouse is really good. There we go. You can look at it for math, if we can get it there. Thank you. And you can also look at it for graduation rate, which is probably the most important one, the end result. So we got a B. The benchmark will continue to go up, and we'll continue continue work on improving our performance there at those subgroups. Graduation rate, we've held steady at a B. You can look at us. Blue is our district. Black is the ODE's definition of similar districts. The green line is the state average. We exceed state average. I'd like to see us do a little bit better against similar districts. So that's an area we continue to focus on. This has been a hard one, though, because they keep changing the graduation standards. So how we're responding to that is, we're kind of. You see this slight uptick over the last couple of years in our rate. So we continue chasing a moving finish line, We've gotten better in terms of our internal processes for managing this. Keep in mind, graduation rate starts with the freshman class. So once that cohort enters, that end sample becomes the final product after 4 years. So if a student becomes credit deficit in, say, 10th grade, and falls behind their grade level peers, they're still part of the cohort. They don't fall back in the next graduating class, and that's an important thing to remember. And so we've had to redesign a lot of our approaches in our data management so that we understand who's in the cohort versus who that year is called a senior. That makes a big difference. And so our principals, and with Scott Reeves' leadership, have done a much better job in this area, and our school counselors, so they have gotten better at measuring this one. So we continue to work on graduation rate. Of course, graduation standards changed again, and we'll see how we do there. But I'd like to see us creep up a couple more points on this one, be more like our similar school districts, and we'll continue working on that. And I know our high schools take a lot of pride in that particular data set in terms of getting better. The last two are two that I'm not big fans of, and I'll give you an understanding why. We got a D in improving at-risk K-3 readers. Come on, Mr. Mouse. So the interesting thing is, notice the 99.1%. That's the percentage of our third graders who actually met the third grade reading guarantee standard. That's nothing but an A at 99.1%. The grade that we got D has to do with students who are on track and off track, these measures here. So year one is kindergarten, first, second, third grade. These are students who, on pre-test at the start of the year, are shown to be deficient, and the percentage of those at the end of that year that have moved from deficient to on track. I don't know about you, but when you cross the finish line at 99.1%, that was the point. So we're getting a D because we are working with students and making progress. That's what the D is for, but at the end of the game, my analogy, okay, sports analogy, if this was the case, then the Atlanta Falcons would have won the Super Bowl 2 years ago rather than losing in overtime because they were ahead at halftime, right? And not at the end of the game. So we continue to do well in this one. That's a point of pride, that 99.1% meeting the third grade reading guarantee, because that means those students were not subject to being retained in third grade, which we know what the research on retention says. So we have a good infrastructure built in place, a lot of resources for literacy. Barb Wallace and her team have done tremendous work with our reading teachers, with our instructional coaches, with our classroom teachers in terms of resources put in place, intervention plans put in place. We continue to do well here. This is a measure that's getting a lot of looked at by legislators, and frankly, most people look at this and say, I don't understand why we're doing it this way when we really should be looking at the end result. So that's K-3 literacy. And then this last one is prepared for success, which has a number of different components to it, and then this measurement system that's based on students who met those points and can earn bonus points. This starts to look like one of those strange metrics that you can't quite understand. The other piece that kind of I wonder about, I'll give a couple examples. So we're getting measured on the number of students who score a 3 or better on the AP exam, or taking dual enrollment courses, college level work, or international baccalaureate college level work. So AP, IB, and dual enrollment all represent a percentage of our students who in high school are accessing college credit work. My question to policymakers is, what percentage of our kids should be accessing college level work in high school? And I don't think anybody has an answer to that question, but we have a metric on here that's valuing that. The other part, superintendent speak here, that bothers me about this is these are programs we don't receive state funding for. We don't get a dime for IB. We don't get a dime for AP. And College Credit Plus we costs us money. I love the programs. They're great for our kids. But I have a little problem with policymakers in the state tying a report card to something they're not funded. Industry credentials we've done a better job on. I looked at us compared to some other school districts. One of the ones that I'm looking at, and I've been talking to Scott Reeves about, is honors diploma. When I look at some of our comparable schools in Central Ohio area, I think we could do a little bit better on this. But this also becomes a resource piece. So again, In this case, in order to earn an honors diploma, a student has to take a fourth year of science, which is more than the state minimum requirement. They have to take additional social studies beyond the state minimum requirement, and some other coursework that's not funded. So we may have problems in terms of access to our kids to those coursework if they're not available for those kids in order to earn the honors diploma. So it's not that they're not willing and we don't want them to. It may be that we don't have enough courses in those areas and seats available, staffing-wise, in order for those kids to access those courses and earn the honors diploma. That may be really where we need to take a look. What also is on it, this is for the, you don't want to look for the class, what grade levels is it? Scott, do you remember which, 17 and 18. So this data travels in arrears from where we're at. So a lot of the programming we've put in place, increased enrollment in AP, increased enrollment in IB, isn't showing up here yet, pronounced, so that will come as we've increased those enrollment. The other shift we made is from ACT to SAT as a test across the district, and what we found was we had a nice jump in percentage of our students who met the college readiness benchmark through SAT versus how we were doing in ACT this last year. So we see some changes we made that could affect this, but I don't want to overvalue this to a point where we're chasing something that may not have the best measurements for us. I like the numbers. I don't like the way the grade card works on this. I do think it's good data to pay attention to, but I don't like getting a grade for something in this domain. And so,
Well, and it might not be, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Okay.
it might not be currently accurate
correct.
because it's in arrears. So in addition to the non-funding piece of it, they're giving us a current grade, that's your grade,
Correct.
based on
2-year-old
a couple years in arrears. So, I mean, I think those are important measures. I'm not dismissing their measurement of at least most of that. But it is a little frustrating to get a current grade based on past data.
Agree. And we're seeing growth in these, and we'll continue to see growth in these because these are important to us. Again, the percentages, the enrollment, resource allocation, the grading of it is where I struggle with. I don't know that this needs to be graded per se. I also think as you look at across the state, there are school districts that, because of the resources and what's available to them, they're not able to do this. To attract teachers to teach AP or have funding for AP, IB certainly is not a hugely in place in a lot of school districts across Ohio. College Credit Plus, particularly for some school districts and where they're located and access to college campuses is limited and having those partnerships. So it does bother me somewhat. And again, back to the honors diploma and your ability to staff courses that you're not really receiving state funding for puts a lot of pressure on the local community in order to make this metric move. So that's just my initial thinking of it. So we had progress here, held our own here. I've had progress here, held our own here. These two grades, there's pieces in there that I like. I think we're doing well with third grade reading guarantee, better than that D. I think we're making progress here that the D really doesn't illustrate what we're really doing here in terms of resources and programs for kids. So there's some good in here that we want to pay attention to. There's some stuff in here I don't think we want to chase real hard. Interestingly, legislators have been working on this for a while, began with Mike Duffy a while ago, and that continues. I sat in a meeting recently and read through 8 two-sided pages of recommendations for changes to the report card that are part of the conversation going on now. So as I've said in the past, I think there's parts in here we want to pay attention to, parts in here I wouldn't pay too much attention to, and we'll stay in the conversation with policymakers about where they're going with it. But the other piece I think that gets kind of hidden, there's some data in here that they've put together where they're looking at spending data and performance data. And I think this has some interesting pieces. So this is what percentage of the funds that we use are directed to the classroom. How does that line up with some of our other districts? And so you can see that data set in there. The red bar is us. In terms of percent spent in the classroom, you can look at that spending per pupil. We actually, ODE's data, everybody calculates this differently. So let me just start by saying that. You'll see numbers here that might be different than numbers we've put elsewhere. This is ODE's number. We actually are below the state spending per pupil average, but we spend more on classroom instruction than the state average. Those dollars are there for you. They also give source of funds that people may have interest in. You can see that. They also over here take that performance index measure that we were looking at, and they put it on this dual-sided chart where you have on the bottom spending per pupil and your performance index. So it's intended to be two simple measures of spending and performance. This red line here is for our similar districts, ODE's definition of similar districts. And if you hover over those, you can see who they are. This shows you where they are in terms of, this is the average line for per pupil expenditure of similar districts. As you can see, we're right behind that average. This line is the average PI for those same districts. So we fall in that quadrant of less than average for spending of our similar districts, but better than average in performance of similar districts, which is a good place to be. You can also do that with your comparison group, and you see the same thing holds, where we are above the average performance and below the average per pupil expenditure to those districts. And there's definitional differences that the state uses for what's a comparison group and what's a similar district. But as you can see, you can hover over any of these and get that information. There's all districts. If I click on that, there's going to be a lot of dots on there, and you don't need all that. So I think that's some interesting data that's available to people who are interested in that as well. It's kind of we're getting a bang for our buck deal. There's district details. You can look at the schools as well and get all the same. And then there's a link back to our district page, our profile page, with additional information if people are interested in about that. So I went through pretty quick. Particular questions you have about any one of them, or something I can go back to? Because I buzzed through them pretty quickly, I realize that.
I don't have any questions, but three primary messages that I take away from what you said and what I read and what I hear. One is that the methodologies do not necessarily recognize student developmental differences and the appropriateness of those developmental differences. And we see that in that K-3 piece, and we see that in the college and career readiness piece. We see it across the board. That's a big deal to me, and it's also very difficult to deal with methodologically, but it isn't necessarily fair to judge with a big fat letter grade, whatever that letter grade may be, an entire district, especially a very large district, where students are at all different places developmentally, and that doesn't show up until you get to that 99.1. What that says, that is a huge success. When we look at where our children come to us, whether it's kindergarten or first, second, and third grade, wherever they are, when they come to us, or at the start of the school year when we do those evaluations, and what our teachers are able to do to help those children reach that benchmark, 99.1%, that is as large a success story as I think any school district has to offer. It's huge. The college and career success one really perturbs me, because it basically tries to force districts to push students into metrics that may not necessarily be an appropriate fit. I think they're important to look at, but I think we have to do that with a very clear eye toward what is developmentally appropriate for our students. So that piece about where students are is very important to me. Another piece that we didn't talk about too much, and when we look across the state we see this massively, are the non-academic correlates. So when we look at the different grades across the different districts and the different types of districts, we see some really interesting variable correlations. And as we look at what methodologies are most appropriate for the accountability movement here in Ohio, we're going to have to find a way to factor those components out if we're actually going to take a look. That gets to that whole value-added issue, and I'm really glad that it's getting the attention it's finally getting, because value-add, as I understand it, is based on a normative curve, and you know what a bell curve looks like. So it basically takes an entire state worth of kids and then provides different weights for different districts based on sizes and so forth. And so we come up with this score that isn't necessarily the itemization of a particular student's growth from one year to the next. So everybody thinks it is, but that's not the method that Ohio uses. There are a bunch of value-add methods. That's not the one we use. So if we're going to do that, we need to be understanding what it is we're actually measuring against, where we're following on a normative curve, which has difficulties in and of itself on where you sit on that curve. So, you know, it's the correlations, the methodologies, the developmental appropriateness, and I keep zeroing straight back, exactly as you've said so often, on the two primary things. The two things that matter most to me, and I would think should matter to most taxpayers, is that 99.1, getting those kids over that really extraordinarily important third grade reading marker, because it's, if kids can't read at grade level by the end of third grade, they have a tendency to fall further behind, and that then impacts their likelihood of graduating. It's one impact on graduation. So we've got that in the early years, and then that graduation piece. And as we continue to move that bar, that's huge, because the graduation piece is the sum total of all the rest of it. So whatever happens to students within all of those pieces, it all comes out right there at graduation. That's where I want to know what our score is. And that's actually the cleanest methodology, even though it's been difficult for us to deal with data-wise. So I want to look at that third grade piece. I want to look at that graduation piece. And the other pieces, while they're important to look at, and it helps us understand how to continually seek to align our standards, our instruction with the standards that we have to meet. Still in all, I want to focus on the predominant pieces that matter the most to the kids. That having been said, we're doing some really good stuff in the district as we look at better aligning toward the standards. Because when you read the standards, you can interpret them a whole lot of ways on how you're going to teach them. So it isn't enough to read the standards, it's enough only if you then understand how the state is going to define that standard through testing. So how do we look at it, what do we do, and how do we teach in a way that meets the standards and protects the joy of learning and the delivery of instruction in a way that's appropriate here. So I don't want people to read too much. I don't want people to read too much into what the grade card says, even where we've made big jumps and so forth. Pay attention to what's behind the curtain.
I agree. Other questions or? I should also add that we are in the process as within our leadership across all the administrators and working in our buildings in our goal setting and action plans and implementation for this school year. So all of our buildings are dissecting their data and developing goals relative to how we're going to improve our performance. And I've laid out performance in terms of the PI as a measure in the academic piece. Because as a sample size of how we're doing it, it gives the best piece, and we want to do some work there. Not that it's the end all, but that is the piece. So all of our teams are in the process of doing that, putting those plans together, implementing them. We're spending a lot of time on that component this year and talking about how we're going to do that, with an eye on I don't want the system to become too focused on the test and not on the quality of experience that a student has, and not on the quality of experience our staff has in terms of designing instruction. I want them accountable to the standards, but I want them more accountable for the kind of learning environments that keep kids excited and joyful about school. So we don't want to lose that piece. And that's kind of feels like a narrow line to go down sometimes, but that's where we want to be.
It's good.
You sure? I think there's some value in the grade card, and I don't want to just dismiss out of hand the legislators' stated intent in trying to help schools develop and helping students become college and career ready. And it is, some of it's disappointing to me from their end and what they suggest they're measuring, and but not funding. And some of the disappointment is on our end, and I'd like to see some more progress, as I think I'm sure all our staff would. If our schools are right now, as you said, kind of looking at goals and benchmarks and just some plans and strategies, I know they already are, but I think I would encourage just continued focus on how can we help better our English language learners earlier. What can we do? What are some tools that we can bring to that process? And those who are economically disadvantaged. I read a letter to the editor today in the newspaper, and it was saying how ridiculous he thought it was that we are seeing a correlation between poverty and school performance. He thought that was a non-issue. And I didn't respond to that letter because I would have said things that were not nice to him. The fact is, when you come out of backgrounds that are less enhanced, I can provide piano lessons for my kids growing up. I can provide tutors, and I can go to class after school because I can do that. Not all of our students have that advantage. And I know down the line, our administrators and teachers are passionate about helping all of our students. I got no doubts about that. This is my long-winded way of saying whatever we can continue to do to address the students who shows up and they are already behind. That's what I think is a miracle about the 99.1. Because they showed up and they were already behind, some of them. And yet, I would suggest our teachers, reading specialists, administration here, hit it out of the park. I prayed for 99.1s in my day. I really did. So if there's any way we can support as a board, I'll speak for us and I never speak for us. If we as a board can support the frontline troops on helping with English language learners, those economically disadvantaged, those who have disabilities, so that when graduation comes, they can be handed something. They can be affirmed in some way. They can be say, you are of value, go into the world and contribute. And they can think to themselves, I do have something to contribute. That's what all of that is about.
You have anything, Vaughn?
I would agree with, for me, the two most important measures are the third grade reading assessment and the graduation rate. And so when I looked through the report and I saw 99.1% of our third graders are reading, by the end of the third grade, are reading at grade level, I'm thinking in my mind, that's great. And when I look at graduation rates, and I'm seeing that we are have a 92% graduation, 4-year graduation rate, that says to me, that's great. And so I struggled with a C. And so one of the things I was going to ask you, if you, as the superintendent, when parents, many of whom are not going to dive deep into the data and do the kind of deep analysis that you and the staff are going to do, that we as board members are going to do, what do you say to parents who are having an otherwise what they believe to be an excellent experience in Westerville City Schools, and they see a C show up as our grade? What's your elevator speech that you give them to explain what I believe is, a 92% graduation rate and a 99% third grade reading success rate? How do we jive those two?
I've said before, and I always say, our real benchmark of performance is the answer to the question, how is school today? Because 15,300 kids get that question every single day, and the answer to that question is the real benchmark of how we did. And then I say to our staff, so what did you do to contribute to a good answer? And for a lot of our parents, I don't think that the C on the report card jives with their kids' experience. We just recognized 7 National Merit semifinalists. We doubled our enrollment of underrepresented populations in our AP and IB coursework in the last 2 years. So there are a lot of metrics that say we're doing good things. Here's the other thing I'd say. Look at the opportunities. So these are outcomes, but what are the opportunities our kids have? So there are a lot of school districts that don't offer IB. You ask what the board can do. You guys provide resources for IB. Our community provides resources for IB. That's not the norm to your neighbors, right? We have grown our advanced placement coursework. We've grown a college a CCP coursework, College Credit Plus coursework. We added pathways. We have 1,300 students in our engineering, health, and business logistics pathways. You're allocating resources to redo the middle school programming. So there's a lot you've done already to add value to the experience our kids have. We are struggling with certain populations of kids, as is everybody else. We're not an outlier on either side of performance here. Now, my goal is to be an outlier on the right side of how those students are performing and become the benchmark for other people to look at. And I think we're doing things to lift ourselves in that direction. When we see students who didn't have access to advanced placement coursework now having access and scoring well and having that change their view of themselves and who they are and where they can be, and how they see how we view them in the classroom, that's how you change things. So my question to people would be, is your kid having the kind of experience and the opportunities you want them to have in our district? And if not, what are we lacking that we need to put in place and look at? And if they're not having a good experience, what are we doing and stubbing our toe on that's getting in the way? And we got to take it, it's the old starfish analogy, one kid at a time, one family at a time. And some days it's great, some years it's great, some years, some kids go through winning streaks and losing streaks. People go through winning streaks and losing streaks, right? Some year you get the best teacher ever and they connect. Some years is more of a struggle. Some years the class you're taking really lights you up and points you in the direction you want to have in your life. And some years you just got to get through that one because it's not lighting you up the way you want, but it's something you got to do. So my elevator speeches, I hope we're giving you the opportunities and support that your kid needs. If not, let's talk.
So I spent a little time looking at the report card too, and it was interesting. The goals of the report card, it states celebrate success and identify areas of improvement, and equitable outcomes for high expectations for all of Ohio students, which, you know, if we break those two things down, we've had successes, we've moved things. You have identified some areas where we still need to work on. I appreciate you looking at our children with learning differences and the lowest 20%. I look forward to seeing a plan, and I know our teachers and staff will absolutely do that. As far as equitable and high expectations for all students, it's interesting. The state might want to go back and look at that statement right there because it's not equitable across. So I'm not going to repeat everything my colleague said. I would say thank you to the staff out there for how hard you work and working with our kiddos. I wish we could take these tests and push them aside. I know when my kid comes home every day, what he's learning and achieving, and it's not just academics. I think we forget that. The other pieces that are equally important. So that's it. Thank you.
The only other piece I'd add, it's a side piece, and Nicole, Ms. Marshall might have comments on too, is when you take a look at the discussion about state funding, the per pupil allocation for economically disadvantaged students is one of the hot button issues in there. What should that number be, and what's the research say? And the number that is initially recommended is not the number that's in there now. And it's not that the number in there now is higher. It is significantly less than what was recommended in that funding. So you go back to resources that we have, but this board and this community has been very generous to provide a lot of opportunities that our kids need to have to get where they want to be.
I do find it interesting, the equity piece in the report card, when
Right.
they can't figure out a way to fund us that's equitable. So it's interesting to me.
Anything else? All right, thank you so much. Up next, 5.2, Safety Initiative Update. Scott Dorn is going to join us and talk about how safe he's going to help our kids and staff and buildings be.
Everybody put your tag on.
Yep. Yeah, I'll put our
You seen these? Absolutely.
Those look good. Good evening, President Davidson, Vice President Velardo, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, and Ms. Marshall. I would like to present an update on our safety planning initiatives to you tonight, but as an upfront note, I won't be sharing many details publicly, but if you have specific questions you'd like for me to answer, please ask at any time. Presented on this slide are items that were addressed for this year through Mrs. Meisner's office, as well as across the district by individual teams mentioned. I would like to draw your attention to the full-scale safety drill with reunification that will take place during the school year. Without going into any details, the district will lead a full-scale evacuation with reunification drill at one of our schools on a non-student day. Just wanted to make sure that we knew it was a non-student day. Also, as a reminder, as we look through these initiatives, that in some instances we may need to address a board policy or an administrative guideline to make some of these initiatives happen. As of yet, we haven't come across one, but we are reflecting over those as we make our decisions. Just a quick update on our communications. Our radio systems are live and in daily use across the district. One of the things we did buy, though, this year was a set of emergency response radios. The same radios, but just sets that we can take to somewhere where we may be having a crisis at any time. The city is going to use those for the event that's going on at Otterbein next week, so we're happy to be able to support them. Our PA systems, we're still taking a look at those. One of the things that I have heard from principals across the district is they don't like having only a single access point to the PA system. They'd like to be able to access it from other places. So we're taking a look at that. When our phones come due, I've had some conversation with Greg Lewis about this. Our phones are not an all-paging system. You can't reach every classroom on those phones. You can only do so many in a group. So we might take a look at that down the road. Just want to give you a little heads up on that. But our device apps, these mass notification systems are things that we are really investing in. Mr. V. Brands' school messenger system is one that you're probably well aware of. Navigate Prepared is one that you're well aware of. But our new visitor management software also has some messaging abilities to it too. So these are just things that we are taking advantage of or trying to figure out ways to improve upon them. Some other considerations that I think as we talk about some of these things, anytime that you're going to have an initiative, specifically one that utilizes people and technology, we also have to take into some consideration about those resources as well as we look at them. Items included in this presentation tonight are components from recommendations made in either or both of the final report of the Federal Commission on School Safety presented to the President of the United States on December 18, 2018, and the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools Safety and Security Guidelines for K-12 schools. These recommendations coincide with the request of our building administrators, staff, and safety teams as identified during our fall 2018 site assessments and principal interviews. The past document, the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, was recommended to us by the Ohio Department of Homeland Security and the Ohio Facilities Construction Committee at a February 2019 conference to be used as a reference guide for safety initiatives. So I guess my point here is that we're using outside sources and outside resources to make sure that we're on the right path. I briefly mentioned the facility assessment tools. In our emergency operating plans, there's a checklist. That's what we're calling the SHORT tool. What we focused on, though, in the fall of 2018 were the facility assessment tools, these longer tools, a lot of questions on them. Our buildings were asked to go back with their building administrators, with their safety committees, and go through their buildings and use this tool as an evaluation process. Many of them included SROs and or district people on their committees. Those questionnaires were returned back to both Debbie Meisner and myself. I then went through those questionnaires and looked for things and then met with the building principals for clarification, and we had some really great conversations about those. Some of those conversations just spurred simple work orders to make some changes for them, and others are the items that you're going to see here presented tonight. Want to make sure that we understand that we are taking a look at safety from multiple perspectives. A lot of times people's minds go to the active threat, the active crisis situation, which certainly are things that we are considering and looking at. But we also look at the materials and environment. We have an ongoing asbestos or hazardous materials program that we use. We just added carbon monoxide detectors in each classroom that's at the first run of every system that uses gas last year. And we have started radon and lead testing. We do that voluntarily. We put every building on a 5-year cycle. So just to make sure that we're staying up, we're doing things that need to be done, not just because they have to be done. From a life safety standpoint, one of the big things about South's renovation, adding the fire suppression system. So some very important things there. But also the student experience is something that we want to make sure that we take into account. And I think we did a pretty good job. We're talking about our safety from a standpoint of bullying and harassment or other illicit behaviors that might happen that you don't want to, but might in a school. But what we did was we asked all of our secondary schools to identify select randomly groups of students, and they completed some surveys for us. Those surveys helped us develop heat maps for our buildings of where they know things are going on that they want adults to watch. We use those in the design and placement for some of our interior cameras. So we're taking advantage of those who are most in the know. just a concept, a thematic approach to the things that we're looking at through a deterrence and detection, deny, delay, and defend model. You can see where all of these things fall into the initiatives that we've got that we're looking at fall into categories. But what I really want to talk about is the layered approach that we've taken. So while this general structure that's in front of you for the past guidelines this is the general structure for the past guideline for layered security. I'm going to show you how we applied that to what we're doing here in Westerville Schools. So you can sort of see by these bullet points here the layers that we're looking at from outside the school to the building entrances, and then the receptionist area, the office area, then our hallways, corridors, academic areas, and then our public spaces. So we've taken a look at each of these areas, and our initiatives are over this time period will be addressing each of these areas. So, and I'm going to get into more about some of the current things that we're doing in just a second. When you start thinking about all of these different initiatives, you can see that there's a great need for equipment, product, and materials. And this is just a list of things that we're looking at that we would like to incorporate over the next couple years. One of the things, though, that is being talked about as part of our bond request and very, I think, important to our community are building reconfigurations at the front doors. So without going into too much detail about them, the concept is a secured vestibule. So the concept is this. A visitor comes to the school. They use our video intercom doorbell to let somebody know that they're here. Through the conversation at the doorbell, our receptionist lets them in. When they come in many of our buildings, they have access to the entire building if they so choose and don't follow directions. There are a lot of people who actually don't know what the expectation is for them. So it's not always a negative that they're going somewhere. They just don't know what's expected. So we would like to make sure that they're all routed directly into the main office, have that face-to-face with somebody. Then we'll run them through the new visitor management system. And then we will use a second buzzer system to allow them access, if they are approved, into our buildings. So that's the concept. As you can tell, if you've been in many of our buildings, that is I don't want to say no two buildings are alike because we've got Wilder and McVeigh and Point View and Frost, but we have some buildings that are more challenging than others. So some of the things that we're doing, we're going to have some full office relocations, swapping with classrooms. We've got some partial office relocations. We've got some buildings where we can just add partitions. We've got some buildings where we're going to add new access doors from the exterior directly into the office. And then we've got some buildings where the building renovations that are going on lend to an opportunity to just look at it in general and maybe start from scratch with some of those entries. Similar, well, I don't want to say similar to what happened at Point View, but in the end, you have the opportunity there to make some significant changes, like a building like Amherst or Whittier. So just want to make sure that we know that there are opportunities for us to approach some of these initiatives differently. One of the things I want to call out are specific board resolutions. If we decide that there's something that we wanted to do, the board, because it's a safety initiative, has the authority to go ahead and make a special resolution. We haven't needed to go that route. In fact, we've found that competition among vendors has been very good to us. And so what we have done, though, recently are the RFPs we actually started with 2 RFPs for access control and for camera systems, and found that integrating those 2 was to our benefit, both from performance but also from a cost standpoint. And so that's the route that we've gone there. From a timing perspective, it's quite complex. We don't want to put cameras in South right now because South's being renovated and we're tearing so much out We'll put them in, take them out, and put them back in again. And so it's a challenge. So when the new wings at South are complete, we'll start there, and then we'll start progressing through. So you've got that things in conjunction with building modifications, after building modifications, or with no building modifications. Some of our projects fit into those three categories, and so our projects will happen when it's the best time for them to happen. We have several funding methodologies. Right now, we're using our certificates of participation funds. We had $2 million allotted to us for safety and security initiatives. That has been spent, for the most part, on cameras and access control in the visitor management system. Our bond renovation funds, we're really looking at the new access into the building, but also some safety film and some exterior lighting as those funds allow. And then some grant funds. This is really something I want to highlight here, so I apologize for reading, but I think it's important to hear. The Attorney General gave us a grant, and through that fund, we funded Run, Hide, Fight training, NASRO conference participation, and additional safety training with Delaware County, Sigma training, the access and use of Navigate Prepared software, software to allow secondary student input into this process, trainings for bus drivers, mechanics, maintenance staff, and custodial staff, trauma training, responsive classroom training, wall placards that are informational guides about some of our initiatives for every classroom in the district, and also preparation for this full-scale drill that we're going to do here this school year, and then behavioral alternatives to suspension and expulsion training, and other program implementations. We've applied for a grant through the U.S. Department of Justice called the Stop the School Violence Grant. Those awards haven't been made yet. We're hopeful. I'll talk a little bit more about that. They're supposed to start making awards this month, but we haven't heard anything from them. And then we did receive a grant from the Bureau of Workers' Comp to fund our camera systems at Wilder and McVeigh, so we're very excited about that offset. And then any government grant that becomes available to us, we will ask for it. So. One other thing, for the maintenance of our systems, we will definitely be needing to use some capital permanent improvement funds to do some maintenance, and also some general funds for things like the visitor management system that have these ongoing user costs. And I'll speak a little bit more about those, but those funds will be utilized a little bit along the way, but not in any significance like the COPS money or the bond money or something like that. Let's talk a little bit about the COPS fund. If you recall, in June of 2018, we made a presentation about what we would like to do. We received the funding, and so we are in the middle of our camera system renewals, our network door access control, which also includes new video intercom doorbells. And what I think is really important is that all exterior doors, when this project is complete, all of our exterior doors in our district will be monitored. So they'll have some sort of monitoring mechanism that will then integrate with the camera system and notification system. So we're very excited about that. We're trying to learn how to use it as we go, but we're very excited about what the potentials are. And then the visitor management systems. So we completed the RFP, as I talked about, for camera and access control. We are through 6 of the 7 secondary schools and the Academic Enrichment Center. Of course, South, we're delaying a little bit. We have started on elementary schools, and this will probably take a full year for full implementation. And what I can tell you, though, about the camera, I think Kendall Harris said it the best on Friday when I was meeting with him. He said that it's been a game changer. So I'll let him explain those words, but to me, it kind of felt good to hear. Our visitor management system, we actually hope to have this online at the beginning of the school year, but we applied for a grant from Bureau of Workers' Comp for it, and we waited, and then it was denied. The BWC was kind enough to call us and say, hey, why don't you do the cameras instead? And so we did, and they approved the cameras, and then we figured out how to do the visitor management system, and we're hoping to have that go online hopefully October 1st. That is our target. You can see the badges I left on your desk are samples of what people will get when they go into the school. if they're going to visit into the building. What's great about this is this is the one where we made some changes with some of the other things that we were doing in one of our budgets. We made some changes, trained some of our own people to do something that vendors were doing, that released several $1,000s that we were then able to use to apply to this operational cost. So it won't be any additional operational costs, but there will be operational costs annually with this. This is the U.S. Department of Justice grant that we applied for. It's a 3-to-1 grant. You can get up to $500,000. We actually applied for $360,393, of which they would give us $270,000 if they award it to us. This is for interior lock sets. So in some of our buildings, we need to change out some of our interior lock sets so that anybody who is with that near that lock can secure a space. And so last year we changed 2 buildings out. I think they were McVeigh and Wilder, and it was about $70,000 for us. So as we go, we're knocking those off, but it would be great to receive this grant and knock them all out at one time. So with the implementation of bond funds, as we talked about earlier, the building modifications, additional scope for the camera systems and access control systems. What we would like to do is, once we have all those in, come back and add panic buttons to the buildings that help lock buildings down and call alert directly to our first responders. So we want to make sure that we get everybody up and then come back and add that. Safety film as funds allow, and then exterior lighting as funds allow. Down the road, we're looking at its technology, so it'll need refreshed. The full complement of the window safety film, as we would like to do. More crime prevention through environmental design. We definitely want to come back, and we might be able to squeeze some of this stuff in now. So I'm not saying we're putting all this off to a later date, but what we can do, pay for now, we'll pay for now. But we would like to put some bollards in front of our gas meters and things like that, just shore some things up. Improve our communication systems, like I spoke about the PA systems earlier, and then make sure that all of our exterior lighting is nice and bright, but not so bright that it bothers our neighbors. So, any questions?
Are we going to do a lot to get out word about the reunification drills so that people don't think there is something happening?
Mr. Vibrand says, yes, we are.
Good. I have, like Orson Welles in my head, War of the Worlds.
Right. I think that's really important that it is a drill, and we want to learn some things from it, and it's, I think, important for us to not to do it on a school day. And,
Very much so. Yes.
And make sure everybody understands that this is going to be happening. So,
I do want to commend you and all of the team, everyone who's involved. The multi-layered approach that you're using has a great deal of common sense to it. There isn't knee-jerk reaction in all the planning that you've done. It's very well thought out. It's very well affirmed by what the research tells us, what best practices tell us, the things that we're doing and that we're going to continue doing in the coming years. Don't keep our community away from our schools. And it helps us better structure the accessibility, but it doesn't turn our schools into walled-off conclaves that keep all people out. It just helps us manage and control and deny where necessary. It makes sense what you and everyone else who's been involved with have come up with, and I'm very glad that we have made the steps that we've made thus far. And I think that as we move forward and people begin to see how this can work and what this looks like, there will be significant affirmation of the work you've done within the community.
well, I will say we have a really strong team, and so if you know Greg Lewis and our IT team, they are super smart and very helpful. We've had building safety teams along the way contribute, students contribute, building administrators contribute, the safety committee contribute. We've had people from Worthington Industries, their security team come over, and we vetted, all of these concepts through them, and they've been great participants. Our maintenance department has been fantastic, and in their end of this, it's just a great team.
Yes.
Mrs. Meisner's office, everybody involved has been very excited about working towards this goal.
I just really great report, great information, strong team all throughout. And you already addressed one thing. I know anything about this, but I was going to say, do you have some outside agencies, people looking at, because if you're in the building all year long, you're seeing it one way. But yeah, you bring in an outside emergency from wherever, they're just going to see different things.
And we had great support by all of our first responder groups, including not just our SROs, but senior level people in Westerville PD who have reviewed our building modification concepts.
Yeah.
So it's been nice to have these avenues open to us.
And I just, the relationship that we have with the police, fire, it's all here in Westerville is pretty doggone good. And I know people on other boards and other districts, as we all do, and it ain't common. It is not common. Sorry about the ain't, Mrs. Montero. But the one thing that you said something, and you said it really very casually and quickly, and I thought it was really good. One of the places where you got some or seeking to do some training were on alternatives to suspension and expulsion.
That was through Tammy Santa's office.
And I thought, okay, so it's not, and I know we don't want to just create a fortress mentality, but we want to deal with some of the root causes of the struggles that people have sometimes. And to look into the alternatives for some of these harsher punishments may bring out the best in some of students that may struggle. I thought that was I thought that was a really wise choice to include it in the idea of safety. And then the last thing I'll say is I wish you didn't have to do any of this. I'm sorry.
I would just like to thank you and your staff for the way in which you have overseen and managed this whole process thus far, and how you are continuing to do so into the future. I think it's kind of hard for people who have not seen it for themselves to really understand the sheer size and complexity of this undertaking. And so I thank you personally for earlier, a few months ago, you took me on a tour because I said, okay, I'm being asked to make multi-million-dollar decisions about buildings I've never been in before. So take me and show me what exactly it is that we need to do. Honestly was blown away. It seems like a simple thing, a small thing, to say every exterior door is going to have video coverage. You know, you kind of say, well, okay, yeah. But until you go and look at some of our buildings, drive by North sometime and see exactly how many exterior doors there are that we're talking about having video for, and alarms. So every time the door opens, there's an alarm that goes off. And so just But the way that you all have managed that process and have seamlessly worked with the staff to make this happen, I think is tremendous, and want to thank you all.
One thing I'd like to point out about the doors, because you will go in and out of them. Some of you have been in and out of them, and you hear that audible alarm. Not all the doors will have the audible alarm. They'll just all be connected. So there'll be other ways that people are notified when those doors are propped open. So
Scott, are you looking at the transportation building and the maintenance building? Anything with those? Or are we primarily looking at our school buildings?
we absolutely are. But we have taken the approach that wherever students are, they're first. So transportation, the farmhouse, warehouse, those support buildings will be the last two buildings on the list of cameras and access control.
So how many buildings is that overall? That's
We have 24 buildings with students in them, almost 30 structures, but
Okay.
the building and grounds complex has 3 buildings on it, warehouse, the maintenance areas, and then the farmhouse, and then transportation's complex. And transportation's complex, we want to make sure we hit the exterior on both sides as well as some interior.
Sure. Thank you very much. That's a big undertaking, and thank you to your team. Appreciate it. Okay. Moving right along. Public comments. We do not have any this evening. 7.1, the financial report, or approve the financial report and investments for August 2019. May I have a motion?
So, second.
Ms. Marshall?
Thank you, President Davidson, members of the board. Tonight, we're going over August 31st, 2019 month end. For the general fund, year-to-date receipts were $65.8 million. Year-to-date expenditures were $33.2 million, and we ended with an unencumbered fund balance of $144.2 million. For all funds, year-to-date receipts were $79 million. Year-to-date expenditures were $42.1 million, and unencumbered funds were $200.9 million. I'd like to remind the board that this is the second month of the fiscal year, and we get the majority, well, about half of our funding within the first few months with property tax collections and things like that. So the timing is why our balances are so high at the time. That's all I have. Are there any questions? Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. 7.2, resolution to approve the purchases in accordance with ORC 5705.41 and Board Policy 6320. May I have a motion?
So moved.
So seconded.
Whenever
Thank
you're
you.
ready.
Yes. So these are what we affectionately call then and now purchase orders. This is where we had invoices that showed up that didn't have a purchase order in place at the date of the invoice. The first one is for Wright Insurance Group. That is a deductible from a case that was about 4 years old. There was actually a purchase order in place for that at the time, but because it crossed over several fiscal years, that's since been closed. And then the other one is for football shoulder pads with Blendon Middle School. They did have a purchase order in place. It wasn't enough for the full purchase, so they had to do an additional one to cover that. So we'll need the board's approval for those. Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. Personnel consent agenda, which is 8.1 through 8.11. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
And Dr. Hopkins is here to speak with us.
Good
Welcome.
evening, President Davidson, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg. I'd like to present for your consideration tonight's personnel consent agenda. Some of the highlights are as follows. We have a number of retirements. We have a total of 3 from our classified division. Leslie Lucas is retiring from our food service position. She has worked for the district for over 27 years. Frank Sanford's also retiring, this time from the warehouse division. He has over 26 years of service. And finally, Kimberly Parker Berry is retiring from our transportation division. division with over 15 years of service in our district. We also have two teacher retirements that will both become effective at the end of this school year, specifically August 1st, 2020. Amy Levine, she's going to be retiring from her instrumental music position over at Blended Middle School. She will have 27 years of experience. And Susan Young, she's going to be retiring from her second grade position over at Wilder with 29 years of service. So I know you've been counting along with me here, but that is a total of about 125 years of service that's going to be retiring throughout this school year. So we certainly celebrate their work and also wish them the best as they retire. Some of them, it'll be a few more months that we're going to keep them working hard for our students. We have also one teacher resignation. Although I don't always call out resignations, I felt this one earns that, and I think others will agree. Janet Carlson, she will be retiring from our district at the end of the calendar year, here December 31st, 2019, from her gifted and talented position for the district. As some of you may know, she was actually going to be leaving now with 48 years of experience in education, with 30 of those years here in Westerville. So certainly, I think, worthy of recognizing her on this evening for all of her contributions and service to so many children in so many different districts along the way. And I'd like to close by saying we also had the employment of 20 different individuals in a number of classified and classified substitute positions. And we do have one of those individuals with us this evening. So if I can ask Miss Rebecca or Becky McElwain to please stand up for a moment. Becky's going to be joining us over at Genoa Middle School. She's going to be a new secretary over there. So we certainly wanted to welcome her both to the Westerville family and the Genoa Jaguar family as well. So welcome aboard and thank you for joining us here in Westerville City Schools. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have for me.
Hearing none.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Velarde?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Becky, we'll see you in 48 years.
We do not have any old business or new business, which takes us to standing business. 11.1, donations. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments here?
Always very grateful for folks contributing to the district above and beyond what is already done. And we are more than grateful to accept these and to acknowledge that. So thank you.
Agreed.
Mr. Velarde?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. 11.2, resolution to approve a parent-teacher organization to be formally recognized by this Board of Education for purposes of liability insurance for the district's benefit. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Marshall?
Yes, so tonight I'm excited. We have a new parent-teacher organization. It is the Westerville Wings Group. It's the Westerville Initiative to Navigate Our Gifted Students. And their purpose is to further support the social, emotional, and academic needs of the K-12 gifted students in the Westerville City School District. So they will encompass the entire district and our gifted program. Miss Kaylee Baker's in the back. She's here if you guys have any questions about the group or anything like that. But what this resolution will allow is for them to be formally recognized by the Board of Education, so they will be covered under the district's liability insurance as they're performing, having events and things like that under our purview. And then they've joined the Westerville Parent Council, and they have all their stuff filed with the Secretary of State and their EIN number and all that. So I would recommend that we approve them.
Any questions or comments? Welcome.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Velarde?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. We have 3 public comments tonight. Just a friendly reminder, there will be 5 minutes shown on the screen. Our first speaker, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your last name correctly, is Rick Goslet? Yes, Gostel. Oh, might have been close, Tracy. Welcome.
Yes.
Yes, please. Mm-hmm.
You're allowed to coach me. So My name is Rick Gostel. I'm going to do this quickly since I only have 5 minutes. If my name sounds familiar, it's because my wife taught in this district or in this school system for almost 20 years. I have 2 children that graduated from North. I totally disagree with your report card grade. My kids both have advanced degrees. They have great marriages, and both of my kids and their spouses live with my grandchildren, and they do quite well. So I enjoyed some of the comments that you all made. Last month was my first time to ever come to this meeting. I got all my information through Pat, so maybe it wasn't necessary. I have always generally, and I'm being honest with you, generally supported the property tax increases. I'm retired. I have a nice income. I have a nice home. I'm not necessarily a typical retiree in Westerville. I sat on the executive board for Westerville, for the Westerville Chamber several years ago, and I always remember a statistic that we got, and it was, and some of you may too, because it was along with the work that you were doing for a property tax increase. Half of the population in Westerville is on fixed income. So I'm not sure that I represent all the retirees. I will tell you, since I was here last month, I've asked a lot of retirees, and we have some questions. And I have 4, actually 3. I'm going to give you all 3, and if this is a time where we can have a dialogue, I would love it. If not, then just tell me that's not what this is about. You're here to express an opinion, and go sit down, and I will. But I looked at the comprehensive annual financial report on Westerville school systems. I'm sure all of you have seen it. Came from .gov here in Ohio. And if I'm looking at this correctly, and I would relate to this as a revenue stream from property taxes, and it's classified as general purpose. So I'm guessing that's where most of the property tax goes, into that fund. And if I looked at that correctly, and I know you don't have this in front of you, so I'm not looking at a discussion for exact numbers. I'm just sharing some general information. I'm trying to figure out if I'm looking at this correctly, if you can say in general terms your assessment's correct. But when I look at the number from 08 through 2017, it's right at a 40% increase in the revenue stream from property taxes. And I realize that's 4% a year. But it's still 40% over that period of time, so it's 7-8 years. That in itself seems like a large amount of money, but I know what I have to do is listen to Scott's report, and it's hard telling what that total package will cost. And I understand increases in the cost of operation. I ran a business here in Westerville with approximately 60 people throughout the state of Ohio. I understand what financial reports are about and how costs increase every year, but it's still 40%. So when I look at what I pay in taxes for my home, I live in the villas at Tussock here in Westerville, and when I look at the increase in what that does to my property taxes, it looks like 11% to me. So number one, am I looking at this correctly? Is that revenue stream up about 40%? It's 39.7 is what I got. And then secondly, if it is 11% on my own property tax bill, my question is, and I guess my point maybe is a better way to say it, is why did you wait so long? I have, in my own recollection, you know, Pat and I moved here in 1979. I cannot remember this community ever not passing a bond request, a property tax increase. Somebody said to me a couple weeks ago there was one. I don't remember it. But my issue is, and I think if you looked at the average retiree here in Westerville, I have 42 seconds, most of them are probably at about a 4% increase in annual income. Regardless of what the stock market's doing, most retirees are not at risk in the stock market. So my point is, why did you wait so long? And maybe that's not a discussion to have. Maybe it's just more so input. But you know, it looks like my tax bill is going up $1,400, just as an example. That's a lot to absorb on a fixed income. So I don't know if my 5 minutes includes your feedback or not. If it does, I'll just leave you with those comments. My only third question would be, I'd be really curious as to who coaches you and works with you as a board and advises you on when to ask and how much to ask for. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rick.
Yeah.
Up next, we have Bill Lenhart. I'm sorry, one more time? Lenhart, okay.
Let's see, this month was the first time I had the opportunity to come to a board meeting as well, and I must say that I found this one quite interesting as compared to the one 2 weeks ago. So a lot of interesting things going along in the school district. I had an opportunity here to recently go back and take a look at your 5-year plan for the Westerville School District, and I'm wondering if the increase in the property taxes is built into the general property taxes in the numbers on your 5-year plan for 2019 through 2023. Are those numbers included for the increase in property taxes that you all are proposing?
Are you asking that right now?
Yeah.
Jen, what usually happens during board comments is we will listen to what you have to say, and then typically someone will get back to you with correct answers.
And also in the 5-year plan, I've heard quite a bit of discussion about forecasted increase in student enrollment that is around 1,300 new students. And I'm wondering, my question to follow up on that is, where are the 1,300 new students coming from? I haven't lived in Westerville very long, about 4 years now. I don't see a lot of moving trucks. I don't see a lot of new construction of single-family homes. I don't see a lot of transitioning taking place in our neighborhoods. So I'm wondering, where are these 1,300 students come from? And in conjunction with that question, my increase, when I look at your total enrollment, 15,385 students, how many of those are resident students who live in Westerville, and how many are non-resident students that live outside of Westerville? And how are the non-resident students funded that come to Westerville to be taught? Not bad for 3 minutes, 4 seconds.
Well done.
So if I can get feedback on those questions, I'd really appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you very much
Right.
for your attention and time.
And our last speaker tonight is Doug Timpey. Welcome, Doug.
You guys got that one right.
I can't read the writing.
I live in Westerville. I'm also retired, and we just read about the tax increase. So we have a few questions about what are the significant how much revenue do you still have a contract with the city of Columbus to receive revenue for children outside of the city of Columbus or the city of Westerville? And I'm also curious about your the number of students you have per teacher. Is that below state average or above state average? And does the school district work on a 10-year forecast plan? Just the things that we're kind of interested in. And what are the options for the school district if the levy fails? I've lived in various school districts in the Franklin County area, and I have to say that this is the largest increase that I've ever been associated with. And in the past, I've always voted for these school tax increases, but this really affects. I'm on a fixed income, and this really affects me, greatly. And I think with all the senior citizens we have in the community, I think it would affect them as well. And I'm just wondering, as Rick said, why it took so long to get a tax levy produced when, if you would have done it over a gradual basis, it would have, it would have worked much better. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Marshall, Dr. Kellogg, do you feel comfortable answering some of these questions now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sure. You want to go first, Nicole, or you want me to? Unless you do the financials.
I can just address a couple of things. So as far as the comprehensive annual financial report, I do want to mention that that is a GAAP report, so it's not on the cash basis, it is on a GAAP basis, which means that it takes into account accruals and payables and all those things. For the specific amounts, I would have to go back and research that and look, because I haven't looked at that over since 2008. The 5-year forecast that was last approved by the board in May does not include the new tax levy that we're asking voters for in November. I did present the board some projections, not the updated forecast, but I did present the board some projections based on the new levy and the new buildings and all that. I can't remember what board meeting that was, but there is a presentation that was presented to the board on that. The win-win contract with Columbus City School District has been approved by the board in 2016. The last payment that we will be making to the Columbus City School District is in 2021. Our borders are secure. I can have Dr. Kellogg talk more about that. We have no non-resident students that attend our schools. They are all Westerville City School District. The school's borders expand beyond the city of Westerville. And the tax revenue that we receive from our school district residents has been what it's been. So that's the win-win agreement, was to keep Columbus City Schools from annexing that property into them. So that's always been our revenue. We've protected that property tax revenue for the school district over that agreement. And we don't officially do a 10-year forecast. I do, for my own planning and decision-making, look at 10-year projections for the general fund. Dr. Kellogg?
Yeah, so a couple of general things. One, if you want, I'll come anywhere and meet with you and any group of people you want anytime. Just contact my office. Happy to do that, share the information. Two, in terms of fixed income, be reminded that the homestead exemption is out there, so that might be something for people to look at as well. In terms of the enrollment forecast, if you want to take a look at that. What did I get wrong, Peg? You're shaking your head.
Not everybody's eligible for homestead.
Understand, but it's out there. If people are interested in seeing that, it's out there. I understand that everybody's eligible. I understand that.
I do want to mention on the homestead, though, it is, so if you were eligible before the rule changes, you're still eligible for the homestead exemption. So that carried forward if you were on the homestead exemption prior to the rule changes. Sorry. Okay.
In terms of enrollment projections, we've had two sets of outside agencies do those enrollment projections. I heard you mention City of Westerville. Please keep in mind that the footprint of the school district is much bigger than the City of Westerville and includes portions of south of 270. We go all the way down to Morse Road and all the way over on the other side of Hoover Reservoir, and we go north into Genoa Township. So it's not a fast growth. It's about 1% a year, but 1% of 15,000 is 150 kids a year times 10 years is 1,500 kids. We've already grown by 1,300 if you look at our enrollment data going back to 2003. And so our projections are out there showing an additional 1,300 coming in the coming time period. There has been residential growth. Look at the Minerva Park Golf Course, which is now an MI subdivision. Bigham Farms over by the Community Center, Rec Center. On the side of Hoover Reservoir, some housing that's gone up as well. And if you look down by Central College, there's housing that's gone up. So there is new housing, there is turnover. Residential property in this area, the footprint of the school district is pretty hot. So It's not fast growth like Olentangy, but it is a steady growth. And those enrollment projections, I believe, are on our website as well, if you want to take a look at those. So I'd be happy to share those documents with people. I want to echo what Ms. Marshall said about win-win and the question about contract with the City of Columbus. I want to remind people of two things. Every single property within the boundaries of the Westerville City School District pays Westerville City Schools property tax at the same rate and always has. They do not pay, if they're in Genoa Township, they don't pay to Genoa Township, and if they're in Columbus, they don't pay to Columbus. They have and always have paid to Westerville City. If you really want to do some history on this, check out the annexation history of Sharon Township and see what happened when Columbus City and Columbus City Schools annexed Sharon Township from Westerville City Schools. That was a big loss to the district. So I'll take a look at that one. The other piece is everybody who resides, every registered voter who resides in that footprint is eligible to vote. So they all have a say in it as well. That would be called taxation without representation in the other way. So I just want people to be reminded of that because that one keeps coming up. So in enrollment, the forecasts are out there. We consistently monitor that enrollment piece. Class sizes for us fluctuate. We're more consistent with teacher contract language than we are with every entity will have different contract language, but in general, our class sizes are consistent with what you would see in other school districts. Certainly not smaller. In some cases, probably a little larger than in some school districts. I'm trying to make sure I hit everything. Why wait? Why did we wait? We really didn't. In 2012, the district passed a 5-year emergency levy. Community passed that. In 2016, as that was getting ready to expire, we put it back on as a replacement. So that went out to the public to maintain that revenue stream, and then we're on the ballot. As we said we would in 16, we said this would be the time period. What we've done effectively is avoid deficit spending since 2012. So from a business model, the best thing you can do is make sure you have more money coming in than you have going out. That's what we've managed to do, but those two lines are going to cross each other. And the operating levy that's on the ballot is a 1-year delay collection. We wanted to align with when we'll need the money for to offset that deficit spending. So it wasn't a wait, it's just another piece along the way. I think I hit them all, and I'm going to go back and say it again. We have 3 public meetings coming up for questions. 2 of them are in the evening, one's during the day. They're on our website. I don't have the dates off the top of my head, but we can give them to you if you'd like. And again, I'll say it again, if you'd like me to come visit you anywhere, I have a group of people who want us to sit down with, we will make ourselves available whatever time it takes. So appreciate the questions, great questions. Appreciate the time and you being here. I think we hit them all. Did I miss anything on the list? I was writing them down as I went. Oh, advice on when and how much. Yeah, we talked to all kinds of people about advice about when and how much or how soon. But in terms of the timing, I go back to 12, 16, and then this is a 20. Really, it's a 21 collection, correct, on the operating. There was one other thing I heard that I want to make sure is clear. I heard, and I think, Rick, this came from you. You said about a bond always passing. Keep in mind that this is a bond operating combined, not simply a bond issue. So there are 2 pieces on this ballot issue, and I heard you say bond. And you're right, bond issues generally from community standpoints get a lot of support. It's operating issues that are more difficult. I think I hit all the things that you asked about. Did I miss anything?
Options if the levy fails. If you want to
Back
talk
to the
about that one, or
community.
we can talk about that.
We'll go back to the community and have a conversation about what we missed. The facilities master plan project that the bond issue is built around was a 2-year process with community engagement opportunities for people to have input into that. And the operating side, everything we've done in the last 6 years, I can draw a straight line back to the strategic plan that was done with community involvement back in 14 and back in 17. So we feel that it's reflective of community sentiment of where they want this community to be long term. That's where it originates from. Great questions. Appreciate the time. Love to talk to you more.
Yeah, I'd say to you three gentlemen, first of all, thanks for taking the time to come here tonight and understand that just because it's not able to be a dialogue, for all of us and just would go too long. But I will absolutely offer to you, Dr. Kellogg and Ms. Marshall, they have the information that you're seeking. And sometimes just the clarification on, so if the Westerville City School District is this big, but the Westerville City is this big, and the Westerville City School District is this big, sometimes there is confusion. Well, is everybody paying in for their kids to be educated? Those are not inconsequential questions. And I really applaud the way you all came here, because the way you were asking things, you asked really thoughtful, respectful questions. And let me tell you, when somebody comes up there and gives thoughtful, respectful questions, and believe it or not, sometimes people don't, I am just really honored that you take the time to find some good information. I've heard Dr. Kellogg say on a number of occasions that before the vote, he'd like to do 50 community coffees. And I don't think Miss Marshall drinks a lot of coffee, but I know you on that night she would drink some. So I know I'm hammering away at this, but I would say to you three, take them up on this offer, because you all asked very intelligent questions. So you deserve thoughtful, intelligent answers, not in a 5-10 minute thing right here. So thanks for coming tonight.
I would like to have the dialogue too, and we don't do that here in this setting. Dr. Kellogg has volunteered to come and talk. If I'm available, if any of us are available, I'm sure we would like to come too. I would actually really, really hope you do schedule that, because as Rick said, the questions you asked are important and they're thoughtful, they're well thought out. I appreciate that very much. And there is good information that needs to be shared around the answers to those questions. Deeper information that leads to even deeper questions. And we want to be able to talk to you about those. So please, if we can set up a meeting, let's do it sooner rather than later.
Okay, do you want to say something else?
No, that's a maybe.
Okay. All righty. That was board comments. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. 14.1, the board will meet in regular session on Monday, October 14th and the 28th at 6 p.m. here at the Early Learning Center. And may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. And with that, we're adjourned.
7:50.